Welcome back to the channel. This is going to be another episode in my series of videos discussing Christians and modern dating and perhaps an alternative to that. And if you haven't been watching those videos, basically my conviction is that Christian men should avoid dating. In most cases, it doesn't lead to healthy outcomes, so therefore it should be avoided. And instead, my alternative to that, something along the lines of self-improvement, pursuing godliness, being comfortable being single, and living your life to honor God and with the fear of God and not with the fear of women. And if you want to hear those ideas more fully developed, go ahead and watch those previous videos that I released. And this video is going to be very similar to the video that I just released before this one, which was going over some of the comments that were left on the first part of this series. And this episode is going to be going over the comments I received on the second part. Just a few of the comments that I received and that I thought brought up interesting points that I would like to discuss and develop further. Before we look at the comments, I do appreciate the comments that I've been receiving, the positive ones as well as the negative ones, and I was not expecting to get this many views or these many comments, so I appreciate that. I appreciate the positive comments as well. I've been getting a lot of comments that agree or that are encouraging me to continue with these videos, and also in a few emails as well that are along the same lines. So I'll definitely be continuing with this sort of theme, but I do want to branch off into some related subjects, not necessarily within the same theme, but some related subjects that I do also want to address. But again, for this video, I'll be looking at some of the comments that I thought were interesting, that brought up some good points and some things that I want to discuss. There's a few comments here that are sort of bringing up the same topic, and so I'll read all three of them and then talk about them. And so the first one here is, this person says, yeah, for the most part, I agree with this video. I think the one crucial detail a dude has to accept in order to maintain sanity with this kind of approach is that God doesn't owe you a wife. Even if you check all the boxes, at the end of the day, a wife is a gift from God. So you have to genuinely accept the fact that you may die single and celibate, and that's okay. And it will not be because you were undesirable or whatever, but it will be because you wanted a good Christ-centered relationship, and unfortunately, in the current culture, finding a woman who genuinely wants that is very hard. The next comment is very similar to that. This person says, most men in Gen Z just won't get married. A few men at the top will have multiple unofficial wives, and yes, many of those wives will be so-called Christian women, and the remaining Christian women won't find the non-chosen men good enough to be with them. And those women who do decide, the few lucky unchosen ones, will be resentful they had to settle, and it would lead to a poor marriage. It just is what it is, and the proof is in the pudding. In fact, it was like this in the Old Testament also. Majority of the prominent men in the Bible had wives and concubines. The Bible doesn't mention the majority of men in these times who didn't have wives, but they too were lonely. That's how the world works, and there's nothing you can do against the natural order of things, broken world or not. Even if you follow all this advice to a T in the video, you can't control the outcome, and in a way that will make you even more bitter. I am proof of that. Followed this advice, was respected until I was cheated on by the very godly woman who chose me, and I chose her. And it was with none other than my best friend at the church. I couldn't control the betrayal outcome and their decisions. Therefore, the best thing to do as a Gen Z male in today's age is accept being lonely and as miserable as it feels to not have companionship. Try your best to distract yourself from the lack of and just exist, focusing on God the best you can and shoving those lonely thoughts to the pits of your mind. Eventually, you'll be freed from this life and be happy in paradise. And the third comment, which is along the same line of thinking, this person says, thing is, possibly you who reads this and 90% of the rest of the men of our generation simply weren't called for marriage. Given the state of women and society, even the guys who do get married, many of them feel lonely and their wives neglect their needs. You're alone, but you're under no illusion that you have somebody. So these three comments, and there's many comments like it as well, they follow the same sentiments. They're encouraging to come to grips with reality and to accept the fact that not everyone is owed a wife, and you have to deal with the loneliness that comes along with being single. So I do agree in general with what these guys are saying. So the chances are already pretty slim, but we can take it a step further. Even if you have that marriage, it's not always going to be on the same level for the duration of your life. So the marriage might start out very successful, but then eventually it'll decline for one reason or another, and you lost what you had in the beginning of your marriage. So it's not even guaranteed if you enter into a happy marriage, it's not guaranteed that it will stay that way. And of course, there's many variables. Married people will probably tell you they've had different experiences and say one thing or another, but generally, I believe this is the case. According to the majority of what people are saying, of what married people are saying and also those who have been married or divorced, people's general experience with dating and marriage, especially when you take a look at the statistics as well. But the one thing I take issue with is this idea that singleness goes hand in hand with feeling lonely or alone. And that's one of the main things that causes self-destructive behavior, and that's what I've seen both in myself and the people and the men that I was around when I was in those dating spaces. They believed that it was normal to feel lonely and to feel isolated because they were single. Now, that's something that takes a lot of time to undo, and it becomes worse the longer you stay in it. This goes back to one of the points I made in the first video. This is one of the reasons why you should not date, is because for the majority of guys, they enter into this mindset because of their experiences, and it makes their loneliness worse, and they think that they're lonely because they're single. And the way to fix their loneliness is to have a girlfriend, to get married, have a family, have children. And so they think that they need those things in order to feel fulfilled and happy. But that is certainly not the case, because many married men will tell you that they feel just as lonely or perhaps even more lonely once that they are married. You have to get rid of this idea that being single goes hand in hand with being lonely. And I know how hard it is to reorient your mind, but the first step is to remove yourself from spaces that are geared towards dating. So for example, if you feel this way and you're still on the apps, you're still on the forums, you're still on the Reddit, on the Discord, you have to remove yourself from those spaces, or you have to limit your use of those spaces. You have to focus on something else for a while until you recover. Now, if you've been in these spaces for years, the damage is going to be more severe. The healing process, if you want to call it that, is going to take a bit longer. But the first step is to limit your use of these spaces. And one thing that makes all of this more sad or more depressing is that women in these spaces are not much help either. They actually make the situation worse. And it's very ironic that women were created to be a helpmate to their husbands, but most of them are very terrible at being compassionate and condescending in a pure way. They can be condescending, and oftentimes they are very condescending in an impure way. But there is a way to be condescending that is in a pure Christian, Christ-like way. They're condescending in a way to make them feel superior over men. And again, I've experienced this and I've seen this many, many times. And the guys just go along with it because they think that's how they interact with women. And again, that just makes the problem worse and worse. Just because you're single does not mean you're lonely. You have to stop thinking that, because you're just making things harder for yourself. On one hand, I do agree with these comments, that the comments that I just read and the other comments that are similar. And like I said, there's a lot of these kinds of comments out there. I do agree with them on one hand, but on the other hand, I don't agree with this idea that, you're stuck being single, and so you're stuck feeling lonely, and you just gotta deal with that. You just have to overcome that feeling of loneliness. But there are ways to completely overcome it and to rid yourself of this feeling of loneliness. You might think that the solution is to just grit your teeth and to go on with life feeling lonely. But even that is a self-destructive behavior, because if you're always carrying around this little bit of negativity in your mind, or self-hatred, or this feeling of inadequacy in the back of your mind, that's still going to affect your choices for yourself. So this is why a lot of guys develop bad coping mechanisms. For example, alcohol, gambling, excessive video games, and of course all sorts of other things pertaining to lust. And so a lot of these bad habits come from the philosophy that you are lonely, therefore nothing matters. If you can't attract a woman, nothing matters. If you can't get married, nothing matters. What's the point of life? And so you begin this downward spiral and this trajectory into more and more self-destructive behavior. So before it gets worse, you have to remove yourself from these spaces that make you think about women and that make you think about dating and marriage. Now, obviously, I'm not against praying for marriage, but again, even that can become excessive in itself. You shouldn't be constantly praying and begging God for a girlfriend or for a wife. There are more things to do in life. There are more things to be engaged in than just women, relationships. There's much more to being a man than just those things. Don't let the church lie to you. Don't let women lie to you. Don't let anybody tell you that your worth, that your value is in your ability to attract women or to attract a wife, to get married, to have children. That is not where your value or your worth is. I think, in my opinion, once you reorient your brain and undo the brainwashing, if you grew up in the church, or even if you were young going to the church, this was one of those things that pastors or Christian teachers really battered men over the head with, and it really causes men to think that they have to be married and be attractive to women, that if they're not doing that, they're doing something wrong. Even within a secular realm, that also occurs. So you have to undo the brainwashing that happened to you. The path looks different depending on your circumstances and your personality and certain things in your life. I believe the first step is to remove yourself from these dating spaces, just kind of cool down, focus on other things, literally focus on anything else, and step by step you will stop negatively associating loneliness with singleness. That concept is not even in the scripture. When Paul encourages men to stay single, he does not also add an addendum to it saying, by the way, be prepared to feel lonely in your singleness. Singleness and loneliness don't always have to go hand in hand. You can actually remove that feeling of loneliness from you. It does take work and effort, but I believe it is possible to minimize that feeling of loneliness while being single. Second of all, yes, it is a fact that perhaps most men in Gen Z will not be married. Don't think of that as a negative thing. I also have more thoughts about that. Perhaps maybe the institution of marriage is being cursed by God because of how marriage has been neglected by the Western world. But that's just a theory. I could dive into that more, but for now, I'll just leave it at that. Moving on to the next comment here. This person says, what does it mean that a wife is a gift from God? Does God control circumstances to force people together or control people's will to make them fall in love with you? Is this gift conditional or unconditional? If the former, what things would a guy have to do for God to earn a wife? Can or should the gift be rejected if they have red flag? So this is a very good question. I think this falls under the category of election and predestination. So God is controlling everything. He is sovereign over everything. So one application of that doctrine is, as it pertains to marriages and relationships, those are also predetermined, predestined, and sovereignly controlled by God. So when Scripture does mention that a good wife is a gift from God, to put it in simple terms, it's not really something that you know in the moment, but it's something that you can recognize when you're already in the future looking through your past. Let's say 15 years from now, you're married, your wife could be considered a good wife according to the biblical measurement. Then from that vantage point, you can look back and say that my wife was a gift from God. Now, when you first begin that relationship or when you're in the middle of it, it's really hard to determine whether that will be the wife that you will be with for the rest of your life. I can't really think of a circumstance where God would force us into a relationship. Is the gift conditional or unconditional? I think the gifts are conditional because when God gives you something, there's an expectation that you would steward it well. And that's something that we're called to do within marriage. There's roles and duties that we have to accomplish. If you fail, your spouse might not be taken away from you, although in some cases that could be the case. But mainly what would happen is that your relationship would suffer. So in a sense, that good marriage that you might have had, the goodness of it would be taken away and you would have a bad relationship or a bad marriage. So in that sense, it is sort of conditional because if you're not keeping up your duties or your responsibilities, your relationship will suffer. What things would a guy have to do to earn a wife? Well, then it wouldn't be a gift. So if you have to earn something, then it's not a gift. The same thing applies to salvation. Scripture very plainly and often says that salvation is a gift and a free gift of God. Therefore, if it is free and a gift, that nothing can be done to earn it. And Paul states this very clearly. The only thing that we earn is the wages of sin, which is death. So similarly, if God chooses to gift you a good wife, there's nothing you can do to earn it because it is a gift. Otherwise, it wouldn't be a gift. But again, that's when you're looking at the big picture. Most of the time, you're not going to recognize when something is a gift because in your daily life, you're going through the motions, you're following your routine. To address the last phrase here in his comment, can or should the gift be rejected if they have red flags? Well, this is hard to say because, people aren't perfect, and even marriages that do end up being successful, they might start off kind of rocky, or even the time before marriage, things might not start out perfectly. But I also have to add that it matters what red flags you're talking about. There are some red flags where obviously you should not even be approaching a woman with certain red flags. It would be unwise to do so. And I could go down a whole list of the kinds of women that you should avoid. There can be kind of lesser red flags, or I guess some people call them yellow flags, or things that are not as blatant, maybe faults that you can tolerate. If you find a woman you get along with, there's going to be a lot of yellow flags, not necessarily red flags. So I hope that answers your questions, and I hope this all made sense. The next comment, since God says it is not good for man to be alone and most men are called to singleness, when you say that marriage is rare now, are you saying most Christian men who actually improve will still likely not find a wife, will still remain single? To answer this question in short, especially once you rank up, once you level up, that definitely opens up the window and the amount of women that will be attracted to you. You may not necessarily be attracted to them, but the option of quote unquote settling does become a reality. Once you increase the different things in your life, you could very well get married. Now, the marriage might not be the best. That's kind of what guys have to not necessarily put up with. That's what their experience has to be. If you just really, really want to be married, that option is always there for men. For women, it's a lot different because women do not settle as much as men. And the way that we know this is because when you see what I've seen in the different dating spaces and people talking about their dating experiences and marriage, one thing that's very common is you'll hear guys saying that they're in a relationship with a woman that they don't really like as much as they did in the beginning of their relationship. They're just tolerating their girlfriend or their wife, and they're just kind of putting up with it, and they continue with their relationship anyway. But then what you hear from the other side, what you hear from the women, they talk a lot about their exes. My ex did this and that, and they weren't living up to my standards, and so I had to dump him, or I had to divorce him. So that's how you know that most women will not settle. I'm not sure what the reason is, but I think guys are just more comfortable with a difficult life. So once you do level up, you can certainly get married with a woman who's, somewhat decent. She might not be the prettiest. She might have some major flaws. She might not be your dream girl or your dream wife. So that option is definitely there if that's really what you want. Most guys are torn between the two sides of this. On one hand, they do want to get married and have kids, but on the other hand, they also want to be with a woman that they're attracted to. And the reality is you can't always get what you want, so you got to find the middle ground between those two sides and then work with what you have. Next comment here, this person says, 2 problems. A lot of people work from home now, and HR departments are toxic towards meeting someone at work. No one wants to lose their job over asking out a coworker. Okay, I'm going to stop right there. I don't think men should be asking out women at work, and you could develop a relationship at work without having to ask a woman out. I think that's the wrong move to do. That already puts you in a position where you're subservient to the woman. So asking out a woman on a date is definitely not the move to do, especially not at work. But even if the relationship doesn't go well, that woman is probably going to make it her mission to ruin your job. I'll move on to the second part of the comment here. He says, second, my experience is most modern churches really don't have events for socializing anymore, let alone specifically for single people. I stick around after church, but 99% of people just leave immediately and don't socialize. The Bible studies we have are sparsely populated, mostly older couples. Overall, the social structures where men used to meet women are gone. Who did this? Well, that's an interesting question. First of all, I do agree with what you're saying here. The socializing structure, especially within the church, has diminished greatly, and that's just because of the modern world and the way modern people are. We're a lot more individualistic, more closed off from each other. So socializing and even socializing at church is not really a great option. Sometimes it does work, but I think for the majority of people, for the majority of men, it's probably not going to work. It's certainly still a good way to have friends, though. I think that's an important thing that a lot of people miss out on. They're so focused on getting a girlfriend, getting a wife, that they neglect having friends, especially male friends. So men should be focused on having male friends rather than trying to get a girlfriend or a wife. I think that would help out the loneliness issue that a lot of men are experiencing. Now, as to the who did this, there's probably a lot of different groups that you can blame. The broader answer would be selfishness and individualism. And now the younger people, especially Generation Z and the next generation coming up, it's going to be incredibly difficult to create in-person relationships. Now, there's another side to this which may benefit Gen Z and the next generation, which is online relationships. I think the fact that we've seen a huge boom within online relationships, meaning that it's not going to go away anytime soon. You'll still be able to have relationships in person, but I think online is going to be where more and more people have success. But regardless, those are my thoughts on that comment. Now, the next one, record-breaking 63% of American men in their 20s are single, almost double the number of women. Of single women, only 38% report that they are looking to date or pursue a relationship, compared to 61% of single men. He cites the Pew Research. What this shows us is that the majority of men, especially Christian men, will necessarily remain single. Men simply cannot have what God didn't create. However, we were born for such a time as this. To truly get past the pain and disappointment that will negatively impact your life, a man will have to grieve the life that he wasn't allowed to have, marriage and family. Only after he goes through the grieving process will he then begin to see clearly and find purpose in other things that are meaningful. For many men, this happens in their early 40s as objective reality sets in. So this is a great comment. I agree with most of it. I'm not sure how accurate those numbers that he cited are. I'm going to assume they're correct. He did cite a source there, and that makes a lot of sense. Most women, they just don't want to get married. They're comfortable not being married. They have a social net or a safety net that they can be taken care of for the rest of their life, and they don't need a man to take care of them anymore. Men, on the other hand, it's a larger number of them that want to be married. Now, I think the reason for this is this shows that men are much lonelier than women, therefore signifying that the male loneliness epidemic is real. Now, the problem here is that they think they can fix their loneliness with a woman. And there's a lot of brainwashing that happened earlier on in these men's lives. And also currently, as we speak, men are still being brainwashed to think that you need attention from women in order to be fulfilled or successful in your life. You know, the reason you're not happy in your life is because you don't have a woman to validate you or to give you attention. And now he does say here, men will have to grieve the life that they weren't allowed to have. So again, I want to stop right there. This is due to the brainwashing that we received. And this creates this depression, this grieving that begins once we realize we're not meant to be married. It's not guaranteed. We just find it difficult to have a relationship for one reason or another. And then it begins this chasing process where we try to find out ways to fix ourselves in order to attract a woman. And this is where we get all these people that are trying to get popular from this. There's a guy who's getting popular right now on YouTube, making these videos directed at men on how to attract women. You're molding yourself into this creature that only exists to attract women. And that's where the issue is. You strip away what makes you, and you become this creature that is desirable to women. You become this idol. You try to make yourself into an idol for women to worship. And that is horrible because most people, even after following those things, will not be able to attract a woman. For the majority of guys that follow those things, it doesn't work. And so it creates this cycle of depression where they feel even more worthless and valueless, and it just gets worse and worse from there. So those videos are not good to watch. You should not be trying to reorient your life to recreate yourself into an idol for women to worship. Now, I do agree that most men will have to come face to face with reality, and they have to go through this grieving process of realizing that they were not guaranteed a wife or a family. You do have to come to that realization, and that's the biggest thing that I want men to realize. A wife is not guaranteed. You're not guaranteed that in this life. So stop focusing so much on it. Focus on something else. Focus on things that bring you fulfillment and success in order to honor God. Do things that promote your health, mentally, physically, spiritually. The sooner you realize this, the better, because then you'll be able to move on and start living for Christ, living for God instead of living for women. So I assume most people listening to this are younger than 40. So you're hearing it right now, guys. Stop focusing so much on marriage and women. Next comment. This is an interesting one. If God sends a wife, then he must be sending more wives in India, considering the fact that more people get married there and have more kids there than most places in the world. So I do want to clarify something here. I guess I said this, a lot of people have been pointing this out. I guess I misspoke. God doesn't just send a wife, but God gifts a good wife. And a good wife is a woman that is, as described in the Proverbs and in the rest of Scripture, that is the wife that is a gift from God. You can find a wife anywhere. You can get married with, there are desperate women out there. You can find a girl who's damaged and she'll be attracted to you just for you being nice to her. Now, I don't recommend that because it's not a stable life, that you won't have a stable relationship from that. But that option is there. Now, that kind of relationship is not from God. It's not a gift from God. It is something that God allows and tolerates, but in those situations, you reap what you sow. So similarly, that's kind of what's going on in these other countries where they do have high marriage rates and they're having a lot of kids. It's not a gift from God in the sense that God is delighted that these pagan nations are producing a lot of children and getting married. God is not delighted in his enemies growing in numbers. This could be a method of punishment or judgment on the Western world. That we're not having kids. We're below replacement rate, specifically white people. And this gets into a larger subject about race and demographics, borders, immigration. We can also talk about Islam increasing in America. So there's different ways you can take this. I'm just going to leave it there for now, and I'm just going to say, just because there are a lot of marriages and children being produced in nations that are not godly, doesn't mean that they are gifts from God. God is tolerating them, but he is not delighted that the number of his enemies are growing. The next comment, 33 years old here, and I have only been on a few dates the last 5 years. I practiced the faith, played college baseball, so I am athletic, not being arrogant, but I've had girls send me their numbers, etc., and yet I am done, LOL. Things have changed dramatically in the last 10 years, and not for the better. Not to black pill, but ignore the platitudes that videos throw out there. If God wants you to be married, It'll reveal itself and you'll be married. Otherwise, just live your life. 100% agree with that. I don't really have anything to add to this. Another comment here, as much as I'd like to disagree with you and maybe still do on some of the details of your philosophy on this, I can't resist the feeling that the core of what you're saying is true and from the Spirit. I can't really expect you to have a developed and mature take any more than myself, as you don't sound much older than me. I'm 22, so can't really fault you on that front, even if I disagree on some level. But listening to this and relating to my own life is a real itch. I feel convicted in my spirit in a way that not many people can tend to make me feel. I can at least respect you for that. Regardless of our differences or similarities, I have confidence that we must be true brothers in the faith. Can't say that for many people around me claiming to be Christian either. Many blessings to you, friend, and the Lord show you favor and more wisdom and understanding as we grow up together in this weird, dangerous world. So thank you for this comment, brother. I do appreciate that. And I'm okay when people disagree with me. This is the correct way to approach. If you disagree with someone, you take what you agree with and you internalize it, you filter it through your own experiences, you take what works for you, you throw out the things that you disagree with or the things that don't work for you, and you just move on with your life. So I really appreciate this comment. And again, this proves that the things I'm saying, the things that I've experienced, a lot of men out there have experienced as well. And perhaps most men don't have the guts to come to the conclusions that need to be had or say the things that need to be said. That's the purpose of these videos here, is I'm trying to help these men out and tell them the things that they need to hear. So that was the last comment for this video. But one more thing I want to say before I end the video. The next video is going to be on loneliness, male loneliness. So stay tuned for that. Thank you everyone for the comments. Thanks for watching. Again, I'm surprised that these videos are doing as well as they are. If you enjoy the content, please subscribe, like the videos, share them.